Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So today we have another shop talk video, and it's gonna be when a mechanic and advisor can't get along because the advisor only cares to pad their own pockets. So with that said, before we go ahead and begin this video, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below. Definitely smash that like button because it helps the channel out. And with that said, let's go ahead and get started on today's video. A service advisor padding their own wallet and not caring about mechanics. Now, this is actually a story and a situation that happened to me a long time ago. I want to say this is maybe about 7, 8, maybe even 10 years now. I worked at a dealership, and I'm not going to mention any names, and I was a journeyman technician, and I was working on a customer's vehicle. Now, on this particular vehicle, I was doing pads and rotors, and I noticed that this car had about 50,000 miles. And even after I got done doing the brakes and checking everything, I noticed that the pedal was still a little soggy. And in my notes and recommendations, since the car had 50,000 miles, I had wrote on there the vehicle needs pads and rotors, and I would recommend a brake fluid flush because the fluid was contaminated and it didn't pass the acid strip test or the water content test. Strip that we had at the dealer that we used to determine whether we should be replacing fluids and recommending certain services. So on this repair order, on the back, I had written that it needs pads and rotors and a brake flush. The car had 50,000 miles. It had been routinely serviced at this dealership, and it had a bunch of work done to it previously as well in maintenances. So the car was up to date on everything except for these two items. So I go ahead and I talk to my advisor and I tell them, hey, listen, I need pads and rotors for the front axle, brake fluid is contaminated, recommend a brake fluid flush. I'm like, they really need the flush, so try to make that a main focus point. They're like, yeah, sure, okay, no problem. And me and this advisor had a little bit of an issue most of the time. And the way that they responded to me was like, oh, okay. And it was kind of in a way like, oh, why isn't there anything else on there either? Because after I handed them the paperwork, when I got back to my stall, I get a phone call as if I didn't even talk to them about 10 seconds earlier. By the time that I handed the paperwork, they said, okay, sure, no problem, I'll recommend it. To me getting back to my stall, my phone rings in my stall and they're saying, hey, Mike, you mean this car needed nothing else? And I'm like, wasn't I just up there? I just told you what it needed. And I reiterated like, hey, it's had a lot of maintenance done here and even recently, so the car's in tip-top shape. This is just what it needs. And like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure. If it needed anything else, I would, write it down there. And I could already tell just from that phone call, because you don't talk to someone and then 10 seconds later they call you and they develop an attitude. So I knew this job was going to be an issue, or this particular repair order was going to be an issue with this advisor. So in the back, I grab another repair order. I'm working on another car while I'm waiting to get approval on that. I think about an hour goes by and my advisor calls me and says, hey, I got approval for that brake job. Come on up and grab the RO. So, I was like, all right, I'll be up there in a few minutes when I'm getting a parts code for this car. So, sure enough, a couple minutes later, I go up there, I grab my new RO, and on there I see that we got pads and rotors sold, which is great. Customer declined the brake fluid flush, but they somehow wound up getting a fuel injection system cleaning, which they had done that not too long ago as far as the maintenance. And by the way, the fuel injection system cleaning cost about 2 times more than the brake fluid flush. And it was one of those petty services that it's just a recommendation and an upsell that most dealers do. On top of that, it also had a battery service on there, which typically will consist of us removing the terminals, cleaning them up, testing the battery, putting those felt pads on the terminal post, cleaning up the battery surfaces, and resealing it with some protection spray. And that itself was around the same cost of the brake service, just a couple bucks shy of it. And I was a little puzzled, and I'm reading this when I'm currently, by my advisor, and I'm like, wait a second. I'm like, you mean to tell me they refuse to do the brake service for the fluid, but they got all these other maintenances that I didn't even recommend or anything? Now, for most people that don't know, typically what a mechanic recommends is what the service advisor should be recommending to the customer. Some of them go rogue and they like to add on and tack on services to pad their wallets, because at the end of the day they are commissioned. So they make more money the more they sell, especially if they're selling these little services that go for about $200 to $300, that ultimately the cost at the dealership would have been like $15, $20 worth of materials. That's what a brake service and a battery, that's what a fuel injection service is and what a battery service is. It's minimal. The kit that you get for the fuel injection service is about $20 to $25 cost for the dealer at the time, and the battery service was a $5 packet with all the materials you needed to do that. So I was a little puzzled, and I go up to them, I'm like, hey, what happened? They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I needed the brake fluid flush. The fluid is basically water, it's contaminated. Oh yeah, no, that they didn't want that, but they wanted everything else. I'm like, first of all, I didn't recommend any of this other stuff. So you hijacked my ticket trying to upsell. And I'm like, you're telling me they were more comfortable paying $300 for a fuel injection cleaning and an extra $100 something for a battery service, but not pay $100 something for the brake service? I'm like, did you even try to recommend the brake service before you recommended the other stuff? Or how did this phone call wind up? Now, right then and there, I already got some attitude from the advisor, like, oh, that's not your business, that's my business. But I already knew what happened. So what this advisor did was they wrote down the top making services that earned them the most money, and they proceeded to tell the customer in this fashion, hey, you need pads and rotors. Obviously that's the main concern you brought it in for, but you also need a fuel system cleaning, and your battery looks a little corroded. Oh, and by the way, the mechanic is giving you an option, a recommendation, if you want to change the brake fluid. That's how it got sold, or how it got presented to the customer. Instead of it being presented in the fashion of, hey, the mechanic looked at your car, you need pads and rotors. We also noticed that the brake fluid is contaminated. You really need to take care of that, especially since you're doing the brake job today. It'll definitely be required. And then you can add on your little padded services that'll line the pockets of the service advisor. So me knowing that that's what happened instead of the way it should have happened, I looked at them like, hey, I need this brake service. This is an issue. Like, I can't let this car get out of there, because I'm going to do the pads and rotors. The paddle is still going to be soft and mushy and have a little bit of sponge-likeness feel to it. And the customer's going to bring it back, and it's going to come back to me, and I'm going to have to deal with it. Even though I clearly wrote it on there. And the advisor's like, you should be happy. I just gave you an extra 2 hours of labor with this. And I'm like, I don't care. I didn't ask for these extra services. I, first of all, need to take care of the main issues that the car came in for. If there's going to be anything extra on top of that, I'm more than happy to do it. I have no problem. But I knew the way that this advisor would sell and how they would recommend things. And I know my main recommendations got pushed to the last thing, because they weren't making that much money off the brake service or the brake fluid service. So that ensued into a little back and forth banter between the two of us, and to the point where I said some unflattering things. I got pretty heated, and basically what happened is I walked back to my stall. This advisor went to the manager and was telling them that I went up there and I chewed their ear off. And then I get a phone call. The manager says, hey, Mike, come into my office. So I'm entering the office, and the service manager had a big pane glass that, you could see the shop from his office, and we could see him from the shop. And I could see that the advisor was in there, and I'm being called in. So I walk in there, and they're like, hey, what's going on? And I just wasn't having it. I'm like, listen, customer came in, needs brakes, okay? The main reason to take care of their main concern was pads and rotors, and it needs a fluid service because they even complained of it being a little bit low and spongy feeling. I'm like, the brake fluid is contaminated. I hand in the ticket, and I get pads and rotors, and I get these extra services that I didn't recommend. And typically at the dealer, you would write down everything on the back of the RO repair order. You would write needs pads and rotors, needs brake fluid flush, and whatever so on it may need. And I flipped it over, and you can see in my handwriting that all I wrote was the brake pads and rotors and the fluid, and then you can see the advisor's handwriting and even like different ink pen writing the other services. You see they just put plus, this, and this. I was like, that's not my handwriting. This is what the car needs. I'm like, my concern is to fix what the customer bought the car in for. Because if I just do pads and rotors and he still has a spongy pedal, they're gonna come back. I'm like, you're gonna call me in here, you're gonna chew me out saying I failed to do my job, right? The customer's going to be pissed off. The advisor's going to be pissed off because now we have a comeback and it's going to hurt the shop, turnaround time and, affect a whole bunch of things. So I'm like, all I'm trying to do is do the job right the first time. Customer will never have to come back for this particular issue and everyone's happy. But I'm like, instead, your advisor is selling all these services that pad their wallet and they're not recommending what the car truly needs. And the manager's like, all right, Mike, just give me a couple minutes. And I went back out to the shop. I just saw him kind of like talking back and forth with the advisor, and then they both came back out to me and they're like, listen, he's like, I can understand where you're coming from, but the customer declined. I'm like, listen, customer declined because this is how they sold it. I'm like, review the phone call. So just to not make this video long, the manager decided to actually go in and review that phone call. And I kid you not, exactly the way I thought they sold the services was how it was sold. Upon the manager reviewing the phone call, and I actually got to hear it myself, they basically told them, hey, you need pads and rotors. We highly recommend a fuel system cleaner. You got a lot of carbon buildup, blah, blah, blah. And your battery is very corroded. It's going to be unsafe. So we recommend cleaning it up because it'll give you longevity. You don't want to buy a $300 battery, so it's better to do a service. And then that was like, hey, also the recommendation is optional for a brake service flush or a brake fluid service flush. And, again, I wasn't surprised. And the manager's like, okay, we understand like what's going on. And the outcome was that the manager just said, go ahead and do the brake flush. We're going to cover it in-house. We're going to, shop it. You'll still get paid the right amount. They're like, do everything else that was sold, and we're going to have a talking to the advisor. But here's the thing. When that happened, and me and this advisor always had issues, I made another video regarding, service advisors and technicians and how they get along. But after this situation, even though me and this advisor had a really crappy relationship because they were always doing stuff like this, they weren't honest. They were caring more about padding their own wallet than caring about the customer. It was just basically a pure sales-driven type of person, just wanted to make more and more commission, which is not always the best case when you're a service advisor because you're going to wind up doing a lot of damage because you're going to upsell stuff people don't need and make money, but cars aren't going to be fixed properly because you're skimping. But after that, I pretty much had a target on my back. I mean, for the past, I want to say month after this happened, this advisor was just giving me crappy work and, bad tickets, like everything warranty while everyone else was getting, brake jobs on my team or, more heavily paying jobs. Until the point came up where I was like, you know what, I'm not taking this anymore. I go up to my manager and, showed him, I documented like a whole month's worth of work that I'd been doing and my hours compared to before versus now. I mean, they opted to get so petty that any recommendation I had, they weren't even mentioning it and it was getting declined by customers because the way they were selling it. And it got to a point where when I went to my manager's office and I made a formal complaint, showed them all the tickets, showed them my work hours, how I had declined, how everyone else is making more, and they're taking work away from me because the advisor was the one responsible for, dispersing all the work. It took him about a week to look into it. He had to review phone calls and see until he made the determination that this advisor was just flat out not recommending stuff I was recommending or selling anything when I was working on that ticket. And ultimately they had to fire them and let them go. So, it was unfortunate for them, but honestly, I don't feel bad because they didn't belong in that position. When you're power hungry and money hungry, and that's your only drive when you're working with vehicles and consumers, I mean, we're talking about a lot of money here. If you're spending $300 on a fuel injection cleaning that you don't need, but you need pads and rotors, I think that money is better suited spending it on pads and rotors than some silly service that you probably don't even need. It is what it is. Honestly, I couldn't care. They deserve what happened to them. Plus, on top of that, I can't be sympathetic for people that hurt my bottom line because I have to feed my family and take care of my priorities in life that, include bills and everything. And this person, for about a month and a half, was messing with my money because I went from being one of the top earners on my team to being pretty much, making less than a lube tech was making. And I knew they were doing it on purpose, but I just didn't want to make it a big issue. I just figured I'd probably get hazed for a week or two and it would get back to normal. Once I realized it wasn't going back to normal, that's when I had to step in and, basically ultimately cost them their job And again, it's sad that they lost their job, but you know, I'm not crying for them. It is what it is. When you're bad at what you do and you try to spite people because they're right, and you feel like you got challenged, and you know you're not there for the right reasons, you get what you get. So either way, guys, I just wanted to share this story. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Please comment, like, and subscribe because it definitely helps the channel grow. Hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you guys on the next video.